Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's me, baby girl Slaughter, Nisi Denise, back to do a short reading. I just want to recap. Over the weekend, we went over chapter 7 of the Napoleonic Wars and Civil and World Wars. And I gave you timelines all around the world of these different wars, coupled with fires, floods, and then I gave you a list of wars that you could go research. Here in the Americas, I also tied in the fact that during the Reconstruction period, in chapter 7, I laid in Jamil Shamsi Dean's book, I told you, Don't Call My Dummy No Dummy. He actually has two books. In the second book, he outlines the many race riots and rebellions and wars that we had here in the Americas and the unaliving of the autochthonous indigenous people that look like me, right? Um, he does an eloquent job, and he has probably 15 to 25 pages of different rebellions, wars, race riots against the so-called, and this is documented, okay, in our history here in America. The people of color documented, Negro, colored, Black, African American. They were originally Indians, and then they were reclassified. All right. So I just want to call that out as just a refresher, a reminder what we covered this past video this weekend. All right, let's get into chapter 8, because this is going to be a quick, I'm going to try to make this a quick read. I'm going to do chapter 8 and 9. So where we're starting off is the whitewashing and repurposing of the world's fairs. Shout out to another author, Howdy Mikowski. If you don't have this book, I'd highly recommend it. It's Exposing the Expeditions 1851 to 1915. He does a great job outlining the world's fairs all around the world. He also has some websites that you can go check out, and you can go per World Fair and go look at all of the buildings and the pictures and things like that, and get an idea of the technology that was being unveiled at that time, which was basically a repurposing or reconstruction of this world, the New World Order, okay, the Nova Secularum, which is on the back of the dollar bill. All right, so in chapter 8, let's get into it. First of all, what do I mean by whitewashing? Well, in this instance, it isn't referring to literally covering buildings with white paint, although that has happened during the last reset too, but to metaphorically painting over history. By now, you will have a pretty good idea or good understanding of why they might want to do this. But I'm going to focus on America, as this is where the parasites concentrated most of their efforts. Okay. When I started looking into the falsification of American history, one of the first documents I found was the 1776 report. There's also another book that I'm going to highly recommend. It's The Falsification of History. You need to go check that book out as well. That the author talks about that, and that would be a good book or good source to add to your library when you're doing your research and your reading, right? So it says the 1776 report, and as it also happens to be the precise year the last reset began, I knew I was on the right track, okay? So it says, the narrative states that North America was a primitive land populated by indigenous tribes, quote unquote, and Native Americans, two different, right? They lived in teepees and didn't have the capability or the capacity to build anything substantial or permanent. We are also told that there 400 years ago, until more recent times, the only Black people living in America were taken specifically from West Central Africa as slaves, starting in 1619 and reaching 10.7 million by 1866. With each ship carrying at least an average of 500 slaves, it would have taken 21,000 journeys to achieve. Okay. Have you any idea what 10.7 million people look like? I know that we are told how many people live in the world today and that we are overpopulated. But when you fly over the countries and you look down, you see mainly land. The towns and cities are sparse. Even here on this little island where I live, whilst I appreciate that we seem to gather in densely populated areas, the majority of the planet seems to be uninhabited. It's almost impossible to find genuine population figures, but an old book my wife found called The Century Atlas of the Gazetter provided some assistance. Published in 1891, the date is useful but not ideal. It states that the population of the entire country of Africa was 21 million, so they say, right? So we are told that from just one of the smaller regions, the slave traders stole half of the entire population. I don't know about you, but I smell a rat. These figures don't stack up. And no, they don't. And as as I mentioned before, and I'm going to use myself as an example, when I started doing our genealogy, and you've got four sets of parents, two grands on each side, two grandmothers, two grandfathers, and you go from there with your mother and your father, and you work yourself out. I have not been able to find any slave ships whatsoever in my family lineage, and I've went back to before the fall of Tartary on two of the genealogy trees. I still have the other trees that I'm working on, but I'm just going to simply tell you I have not been able to find it. All right. So this out of Africa hogwash is poppycock for real. Dan Calloway, Camiro, even Chief Red Wolf. There are multiple people that have talked about that this made up narrative that they're giving us. And if you start to do the math and you start to really look, you're not going to be able to find the volume of people that they said came over here. In fact, history was told to us in a verse. They actually came over on the slave ships as indentured servants. And, they actually were released from asylums and prisons as they were raised up and groomed, right? And they came over here to fight on the soil and to gain a foothold. That's what they did. That's how they repopulated this world. And that's how they actually bombarded America. And there were 7 countries that did that. All right. So when you look at what they're telling us and you start doing the math, you start doing the research, you'll see the irregularities. They don't add up. So it seems pretty clear and is well documented that Black people were used as slaves by the parasites and their ilk. But perhaps there is a different theory regarding where the majority of them came from. Having established that America was already populated by the Moors, all right, which they did trade with us. And so, yes, there were some that came from Africa that were here and that traded with us. And some of them married into the indigenous peoples. But when you're looking at the Moors versus the American Negro, two different people, two different people, bone structure, hair, texture, skin, everything, teeth, totally different. So you're looking at the tribe of Shem and you're looking at the tribe of Ham. The Shemitic people are the American Indian or the AKA the Negro people like me. All right. And then you've got the children of Ham, the progenitor of the dark race, but not the American Negro. All right. You just got to understand that. I'm not trying to rub people the wrong way, but you got to go do your research and you got to understand what has transpired when you're looking at the numbers. You start looking at the documentation. All right. So it says, having had their country all but destroyed by the comet of 1811, supposedly a comet, but we know probably it was a nuclear attack, followed by earthquakes, fires, and floods, then the outbreak of the Civil War, and then the Moors that survived were then enslaved. Okay, so you've got a lot going on. Again, they cooked up a good story and then they laid good foundation for everyone to buy into it, right? So it says to whitewash American history, thus preventing anyone knowing of the previous civilization and the incredible and technological advanced society that has established. The parasites came up with the story of these African Americans actually arriving on ships or slaves, courtesy of the British Empire. Yes, the Moors originated from Africa, but not exactly in the way mainstream history has told us. As previously mentioned, the Moors were a significant part of the Empire of Tartary. In fact, these people were noble, sophisticated, highly advanced, and their architecture and building methods had constructed not just the Star Forts, but every single magnificent building that was left standing, including, quote unquote, they call it the White House, but you got to remember what I told you it was called before. You will look it up in when you do your research, you'll see that it was called the Franklin House. Okay. And there were autochthonous or melanated people that built all of these grand cities and buildings. And behind me, I have 2 books on patents that tell us how many patents our people actually created. And pretty much everybody today in the world is utilizing the technology and the patents that we created. And there's no slight to my light-skinned brothers and sisters, but you got to really understand the brevity of what they've done and the rewriting and the whitewashing of history. I mean, it's there. They haven't erased all of the information yet, right? If you do your research, you'll see it. So then it says the only way the parasites had to destroy their history and to stake claim into America was to enslave them, changing their names and forcing them to speak English. By re-educating them, those that refused to comply were murdered, and their children grew up and know nothing about their past. Yeah, that's true. Instead, they were given a new narrative and told that the early white settlers had civilized America, and that before they arrived, it was barren with only tribes of indigenous peoples inhabiting it. And that was a lie. That was a lie. And at some point, I might try to circle back. I saw your video today, Chief Red Wolf. I heard parts of it, and I need to go back and finish it tonight before I go to sleep. But I want to talk about the sundown towns, and I am going to do some research on that. And this is no slight again to my light-skinned brothers and sisters. We're all learning, all right? And I'm just bringing some interesting information that you all can go look up. Interesting how we have a lot of sundown towns with a lot of racist dumbasses. And you got to understand, you guys are third and fourth generation. You know, some of you are second generation people that your ancestors came over here on boats, and then you set up shop over here. And then the towns that were here were already established, and there were melanated, autochthonous American Indian people there already living in those towns. Okay. So when you come through with the KKK and all of the narrative that was painted, right, especially the Confederate Civil War, when you have that type of narrative, you got to understand that all of us have truly been lied to and bamboozled. I'm just telling you. I'm going to do some information or share some information with you guys once I do the research on sundown towns. Because I'm going to show you in those certain terms that the majority of, if not all of those towns, were pretty much all black people. Okay. And then you've got the narrative or the whitewashing of people coming in and taking over. It's just, I am course correcting what has transpired and explaining to you all that there are alternate means to go research and really look up something. All right. And I know some of you will say, oh, that's pseudoscience, that's pseudo history, that's not mixed. No, it's documented. You just got to put it together. I mean, the information's still out there. It's just, we're too lazy to go look it up, right? And we believe what we've been taught based on a curriculum that these parasites put together for all of us. And it doesn't matter what color you are, but you've got to understand the brevity of the situation and what they've actually done and what they're about to do again, okay? So it says, so what they did was they were told that there were only tribes of indigenous people inhabiting. No. We were in the cities. There were millions of people, melanated people all around the world, because we were on every continent. They unalived a lot of people. And yes, again, for the sake of this video, there were light-skinned people here, aka white people that were here, but not on the scale that we have today. Okay. And as I've said before, if you have O positive or O blood type and you are light-skinned, quote unquote white, then you need to do your genealogy, because you definitely have some melanated Negroes in your family. I'm just going to tell you. So whether you like it or not, you need to go do your research. I'm just telling you. So then it says, so the term whitewashing not only refers to the painting over a building from the old world, thus hiding dates and engravings, but also refers to a far worse and sickening method of denying people from knowing their history and the incredible achievements of their ancestors. As I've said, I've got books on patents of what our people created. Everyone is utilizing our culture, but telling us that our ancestors are from Africa when they weren't. They were from right here in the US. And that's why you've got certain groups that are set up like these churches, Mormons, and you've got the quote unquote Native Americans that have records, hundreds of records of melanated autochthonous, aka black people. All right. I'm just going to tell you, they know who we are, right? We don't know who we are. Everybody outside the US also knows. Chief Red Wolf on his live this weekend was saying a gentleman in Crimea, or either it was Russia, said, we know that all of the so-called saints and all these revered people were black, so-called black people. You know, the apostles, the icons. They were black. They know that, but we don't know that here in America. All right. So it says, in the same way, the parasites also hid the true purpose of many of the world's most famous and magnificent buildings, choosing to take them for themselves and for government use, hiding or disguising the real date of the construction, their architects, and the people that have built them, as mentioned in chapter 3. However, it wasn't just churches and cathedrals and star forts that they corrupted, but also every significant structure left standing after the numerous wars, floods, and fires. Those that they did not want but were too exposed to destroy were just left to decay. And you will see this still taking place today. The next time you are in an old town or city, you will often see huge buildings with incredible features like pillars and gargoyles boarded up and falling in disrepair. Once they reach a point of no return, they are often secretly opened up to allow homeless people inside, who often start fires or simply keep warm. And once fire damaged, they can be sold off to developers, even if they were previously listed buildings. Okay. So it says, as stated before, perhaps the biggest telltale signs of a building that survived is the basement window. These mud flood windows have only the top half of the window exposed, with the lower half hidden under the street or ground. These buildings were literally dug out of the ground after being discovered or found following mud flood events. And I'm going to show you this really quick. I'm going to tag this right here so I won't lose my spot. And I want to show you, and I know I've sort of did this before, but I want to show you specifically a building where you can see the windows and how they look really funny. I know Andre Stafford, he was up in North Baltimore or up near Washington, and he had did a video showing, did pictures, and he showed when he went downtown, he found some Sartorian buildings that you could tell how they were repurposed, how they were dug out. Mud flood window right here. I'm going to hold this up so you can see it. Check it out. Look down here. So these buildings were literally dug out. I mean, it was tons of mud. Look up here. See how the mud was just set up there? And that's what they were doing. They repurposed these buildings after the flood, after hundreds of thousands and millions of indigenous, Black people, I'll just say that for the video, were unalived. I mean, yes, you did have some light skin or white people here, but not on the scale. And as I said before in my previous video, the white people that were here came from us. I mean, and I have to point this out and drive this home. The so-called quote unquote Black woman is the only archetype that can create all the races. We have what's called the Eve gene. You go look that up. Read genetic papers. If you want me to, I'll send you some. But we have the blueprint to create all the other races around the world. So when you have that, and you know that we did have some light-skinned people here, they were approached, and believe it or not, those were the very first ones that they killed. They unalived them when they started hanging people, and then they started warring with us, and they killed us too. We were hung too, but they were hung right beside us. Right? I'm just going to tell you, it's the history the ugly truth that nobody wants to talk about. Right? So it says, in some parts of the world, many temples and structures have been buried completely. Some have already been discovered, and I hope that many more will be over time. However, a great deal will probably never be seen again. I've included examples of buildings hidden following the mud floods in the center of the book. He does have pictures. I believe the reason for stating these were founded or established rather than built is because the parasites are adhering to the karma and universal law. This means that in order to see their prophecies come to fruition, they must not lie. That doesn't mean that that they tell you the truth. Far from it, but just decline to talk or to comment or tell you their way out of the question, right? They'll talk around it. They won't actually answer it directly, right? So it says, more often than not, they will simply just avoid topics they cannot talk openly about or change the subject. We have all seen the politicians do this time and time again, and interviewers get frustrated from them not giving a yes or no answer to even the most basic of questions, right? One building that I didn't think would actually appear on a Google search, which is using the specific term founded, was St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The Wikipedia entry reads, its dedication in honor of Paul the Apostle dates back to the original church on this site, founded in AD 604. The present structure, which was completed in 1710 AD, is grade 1. Okay. I thought about these dates based upon the theory that our timeline is possibly out by 800 to 1,000, in this case, anything written or carved or engraved. So they added 1,000 years, like I've said on many videos previously. So it says, by removing the eye removing the 1 from 1710, giving us 710, could mean this cathedral was built in one complete structure and not one built on top of the other, thus taking 106 years to construct, right? It is also strange that places like this and Buckingham Palace weren't completely destroyed during the Blitz on World War II. Yet Dresden in Germany, which was a magnificent example of a Tartarian city, was completely flattened. The Eiffel Tower and the Notre Dame stayed, as did many of the other incredible palaces and government buildings, like the Palace of Westminster. This goes back to another conspiracy theory in which all of the world leaders are actually the very best friends, but certain presidents and dictators take turns as being the bad guy and taking one for the team, so to speak. Okay. This is probably why asylums and orphanages were such incredible buildings, sat in acres of land, and with entrances like a great Roman villa or temple. I cannot believe for 1 minute that they would purpose build these just to house the very people in society wanted out of the way. This parody actually connects or helped me connect the dots, as it compounds the theory that these Greco-Roman buildings were already there and they were repurposed. All right. And he's got pictures in the book of some asylums. Okay. If you consider how long it would take and how much it would cost to build these, to believe that they were specifically built or especially built for orphans and the mentally ill is one hell of a stretch. It's compounded further when you look at what the early settlers lived in. Okay. When you look at these shacks and they say they live in teepees, and you look at the buildings that were built in the earlier turn of the century when you had a lot of these Cabbage Patch coming over, it's completely different architecture. I mean, we've gone downhill, and I'm telling you, since the last reset, it was all by design and for purpose, right? The buildings that they built then compared to what we have now, when the devastation and the reset happens again, okay, all these buildings will be wiped out just like that. It'll be so much easier to get rid of all the evidence of the people here. I'm just telling you, because they're not built to the construction that they were, 1,000 years ago. All right. I'm just telling you 300 years ago. All right. So when you know. So it says it compounded further when you look at what the early settlers lived in, how they appeared, and the narrative tells us that they achieved it with just a horse and cart, hammer and chisel. It would therefore suggest that many of these early settlers, not only here in America, but countries like Argentina, New Zealand, and Australia, were highly skilled stonemasons with incredible wealth, manpower, and time at their disposal. Most of the capital city buildings left for the old world even look very similar, face the same compass direction, and are built on ley lines. Yet we are told that the architects involved simply appreciated the particular style of structure, okay, without ever having visited Greece or Rome or anywhere else for that matter. And I pulled up on my laptop and showed you that in a couple of videos back, where we got into looking at, a couple of Tartarian buildings around the world, and then we looked at certain structures on the 12 ley lines. And I pulled that up and I showed you guys, right? So then we get into, then comes the World Fairs, and as another level altogether. From just around the reset of 1776, all right, that's the Reconstruction of the Americas, we saw the start of the grandest fairs and expositions in the world, where very latest technology was on display in every major city, from the Edison's apparent invention of the light bulb in 1880 to the very first incubator in 1896 by Martin Cooney. The building, statues, and the interior design that went into these, fairs was staggering. Many resembling temples you find in the Far East or in Rome, apparently built in around a year. Okay, that's what they tell us, with plaster and water and mud. A year. Following the events, were demolished within as little as 6 months, often after accidental fires. And we talked about how every city around the United States, really around the world, had fires and floods. Okay, they had to do this, and they came up with this grand plan to do this and to execute this. And no one is really the wiser. Very few people are actually researching and waking up to see the alternate turn of events, right? So by 1870, there had been over 75 World's Fairs as far away as China and Samoa, attended by people from all over the world at a time when world travel was costly and, time consuming. Not only that, but transporting the inventions on display would have taken a great deal of effort, as it was all done by sea. Moreover, how did they get the public to attend? They claimed that at Chicago's World Exhibition in 1893, over a quarter of the population of America attended. But how? When did they say, and are we expected to believe, that they trekked across the country in a horse and buggy? Doesn't make sense. Just the logistics of the number of people attending anything would be impossible today and would blow Disneyland's numbers off visitors out of the water. Okay. It is my opinion that the World's Fairs and Expositions were housed in Tartarian or Moor palaces and their grounds, aiming to fool people into thinking that the early settlers were capable of constructing such great architecture. He's right. It was. And to justify these buildings being there. At the same time, these events could showcase old and reverse engineered Tartarian technology or aquatect that they had perfected and was now available for public consumption, because they pretty much unalived the majority of the people. So you had a small percentage of what was. I mean, you still had a lot of us that were here fighting, as you could see in Jamil's book, how many rebellions, riots, wars there were just on the soil alone is just staggering of how many people were unalived. All right. So it says, inventions first presented at these events included electric telegraphs, microscopes, thunderstorm registers, the Ferris wheel, moving sidewalks, juicy fruit chewing gum, aerosol paint, and later on the fax machine, telephones, and neon lights. Two of the most famous inventors to have their inventions on display were Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. All right. Chief Red Wolf worked in the Edison building, and he can tell you, I mean, and like I said, I have books behind me that show you the patents that we actually patented. And it was before this stuff. All right. So it says, here are just a few of the World's Fairs and Expositions. So I'm going to read these out to you really quick. 1791, Prague, Czechoslovakia. 1798, Paris, France. 1829, New York. 1829, Turin, Italy. 1846, Genoa, Italy. 1849, Birmingham, England. 1849, London, England. 1852, Cork, Ireland. 1853, Dublin, Ireland. 1854, Munich, Germany. Melbourne, Austria. 1856, Brussels, Belgium. 1857, Manchester, England. 1858, Philadelphia. 1861, Brisbane. 1861, Amsterdam. 1863, Constantinople, Turkey. 1865, Cologne, Germany. Doesn't those cities sound familiar? I was reading to you about the floods and about the so-called quote unquote comets and the earth, the fires and earthquakes and things like that. I'm just simply telling you, they just went in, cleaned house, and then they reintroduced everything. And they took the patents and the inventions and they repurposed all this stuff and gave us a new structure, a new world order, just like it says in the back of the dollar bill. All right, I'm just telling you. All right, so let's finish. 1866, Stockholm, Sweden. 1867, Vienna, Austria. Sydney, Australia, 1870, 1872, Christchurch, New Zealand, 1875, Santiago, Chile, 1880, Glasgow, England, 1881, Atlanta, 1882, Buenos Aires, Argentina, 1883, Hobart, Tasmania, 1884, Cape Town, South Africa, 1885, Wellington, New Zealand, 1888, Barcelona, Spain, 1891, Kingston, Jamaica, 1893, Chicago. I ended the list prematurely as it goes on for several more decades, and I wanted to pay particular attention to Chicago's events in 1893, which is in this book, okay? Known as the World Columbian Exposition. Only 20 years earlier, Chicago literally had been burnt to the ground by yet another accidental fire in 1871. The narrative states that it was caused by an Irish immigrant and then left a lantern unattended in his cow shed, which was then knocked over by one of the cattle. This fire resulted in over a third of the population becoming homeless. But by some strange kind of divine intervention, they rebuilt the entire city in just a few years. These days, it takes 5 years to knock up a soulless housing estate. So when you consider that at the same time, they also managed to design and build one of the largest World's Fairs of the era, covering over 800 acres, it's nothing short of either a miracle or a blatant lie. And we know it was a lie, right? As we talk about these cities that come in, and they reconstruct the cities and they give it a whole new, a whole new narrative, and they repurpose the buildings and so forth. They change the dates on the buildings. They set up shop in the buildings. They're churches. They're now government buildings. They're now universities when they were once people's homes. I'm just simply telling you that, and they were used for meditation and healing centers, right? So, a lot, oftentimes when you have these towns, you have these sundown towns. And like I said, I'm going to be doing some research over that, and I want to bring some information to the forefront, because a lot of people don't really understand that. Again, this land was predominantly American Indian, which was a Negro. And when you have these KKKs and these dumbass racists that come in, what they've done is they've rewrote the narrative and pretty much drove all the melanated people out, if not murdered them, drove them out. And now, they're sundown towns. They're repurposed, just like we have here. So the commonality in the narrative is the white supremacy, the fake white superiority, and the repurposing of these buildings, the recreation of history, and spoon feeding everyone this bullshit. Okay. I'm just simply, you got to do your research. I'm not race baiting here, but it's time for us to have these intelligent conversations and look at the information critically. Because again, there's no way that 21 million people, if the population is 21 million people, 10 million people were brought over on slave ships over 21 years? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up. The math ain't mathing. I'm just saying. So when you look at the population becoming homeless and then them, building up these entire cities in just a few years, it doesn't make sense. So it says these days it takes around 5 years to knock up a soulless housing estate. So when you consider it at the same time that also managed to design and build one of the world's largest fairs of over 800 acres, it's nothing short of a freaking lie. And it is. So coincidentally, this expo was also known as the White City, had all the buildings whitewashed. My guess is that they were already there, as with all the other World's Fairs, and whitewashing them hid a multitude of clues that would connect them to the old world and the lost Tartarian Empire. Bizarrely, it was also almost impossible to enter these events unless you were white. Okay. Quote unquote light skin, because we don't do the crayon colors over here on this page or this channel. So it says they managed to lose 30 children, with 10 never seen again, and there were over 954 arrests. Okay. On display, you could see an Eskimo village, the natives of the Homi, showing traditional methods of fighting, dancing, and singing. In the guidebook, they describe these women as masculine and not very attractive, and the men as effeminate. They even showcased a Moor village with huge emphasis on them being primitive. Here are just a few of the inventions that went on display for the first time: the dishwasher, Quaker oats, shredded wheat, the Braille books, giant fruit, a Viking ship. Apparently, this was actually sailed all the way to America from Norway. And of course, if you've been listening to me, you know that the Vikings were actually melanated. Just going to tell you. Like I said, you just got to go look up you just got to do the research. You'll see it. And I mean, it makes some people uncomfortable, and they don't want to have these conversations because it threatens who they are. Because you've got to understand, if you've been taught a certain narrative all your life, and then you come to find out that you were lied to and that you weren't told the truth, then yeah, there is going to be some people that's going to push back this information and go, this is bullshit. This is hogwash. All this tomfoolery. What is she talking about? It takes somebody who has a critical mind and who actually wants to see the information for themselves. They'll begin to put the puzzle pieces together. So it says, this city only lasted 2 years, as it was accidentally destroyed by yet another fire. The structures and statues that remained were then blown up using dynamite. No, I mean, the only reason why they would blow these cities up is because they never built them, and they don't cherish them, and they didn't value them. I mean, anybody that comes in and destroys something, obviously, if you work to build it and construct it, you would take better care of it. I'm just going to simply say, who would build a house and then burn it up? That just would make no sense to me, right? It's because you didn't build it and you have no value in it. So it says another interesting expo of the time was the Lewis Purchase Fair held in 1904. This one covered 1,200 acres with 65-foot statue of the Golden Lady, also known as the Statue of the Republic. This was a solid copper colored. This was a solid copper covered in gold leaf, but along with the rest of this fair, it was destroyed. Just like the statue that was given to us by was it France? And it's in New York. I can't think of it. It's off the top of my head. It'll lose me right now because I've been up since early this morning. But the statue in New York, and you know the one I'm talking about. Same thing. So it says this particular expo was dominated by Nikola Tesla, who apparently redirected energy all the way to St. Louis from Niagara Falls. Amazing when you consider that electricity had just been invented or rediscovered. Okay. Along with a moving sidewalk that spanned the entire grounds, as well as the electric train transporting visitors around the site, they even managed to quickly knock up a series of canals. However, pride of the place here went to the 390-foot electrical tower illuminated 500,000 light bulbs. It was called the Goddess of the Light and had solid golden statue, again, of the Golden Lady perched on top. Just imagine how many generators and miles of cabling you would need to create this, even today. But regrettably, the entire city was once again blown up in dynamite shortly after it closed. I would highly recommend looking into the particular World Expo as it followed the Louisiana Purchase, which was one of the acquisitions of the territory of Louisiana by the United States from the French First Republic in 1803. This consisted of most of the land in the Mississippi River's drainage basin west of the river and cost just 4 cents as an acre. What is strange about the expo is that the building that I've included in the image of it shows it constructed in 1803, yet Wikipedia states the construction started and continued in 1903. Moreover, the image one I provided shows the entire area covered in mud, which is clearly inside the building too. This is a perfect example, perhaps, of one of the best of the mud floods and this incredible Tartarian or old well buildings being repurposed. Surprisingly or not, it was demolished at the end of the event in just under a year. Along with the buildings, the Ferris wheel in America was demolished too, and it was too costly to take down and transport it elsewhere. Besides, nobody wanted it. Okay. The next event I researched was the Barcelona World Fair in 1888. This included one particular building that measured 5,000 square meters and 600 rooms, 300 apartments inside, all carved with marble and stone in just 55 days. There's no way. Are you getting suspicious yet? He says. So in closing, it says, ultimately, these events were mass brainwashing exercises. What were once Tartarian palaces and temples were shown off to the world as having been built from scratch by local builders in as little as 6 months, then destroyed shortly afterwards. For reference, I have included several images from the World's Fairs and expositions in the center of the pages. Now, next up, he talks about the Vanilla Skies. We're at 38 minutes. So, bodies piled up in Dresden. I'm just going to show you this. Look at Dresden. They have bodies in the street. Look. See the people? Right here. And let me see if I can find that building really quick. There's so much. There are pictures. He's included a lot of images. I'm just trying to see. I showed you star forts on my last video. I'm trying to see. Even the bells were healing and they were used. I don't know if I'll be able to find it really quick on this video. Let's see. That's Dresden. That's the Dresden Palace. He said Louisiana. I know he put it in here. I was trying to find it really quick before I log off. World Columbian Fair, Chicago. Okay, here it is. Yeah, here it is. It's probably hard for you to see, but just look right here at the bottom. If you want to take a screenshot and blow it up, it's covered in mud. And look at this one up at the top. But this is it right here. So it just goes you right there. It shows you that the mud was just astounding. All right. So when I come back, I thought I was going to read chapter 9, Vanilla Skies. It's only 2 pages. We're at 39 minutes. Let's go ahead and knock it out so that we can get into chapter 10 when I come back. Chapter 9 is vanilla skies. This term is best described as Victorian photoshopping, but is also known by several other terms such as the old world photo manipulation, layering, sky swapping, photo processing, Victoria photo images, and other slightly weirder practice called spirit photography. All right. Today, it's so easy to alter a photograph. We're all doing it, from softening your profile picture on social media to actually creating your own AI artwork, as commonly seen on TikTok. However, back in the 1840s, it was very new technique, and the majority of people were totally unaware it actually existed. One particular pioneer of the spirit photography was William H. Mumler, a photographer from New York, okay, who claimed he could capture images of the deceased. These started when he developed a self-portrait and accidentally had a negative of his dead cousin under the plate. When developed, the photo had a faint image of his cousin so his cousin stood right next to him. Crazy. My own issue with this narrative is that it stated in several places that Mumler was mass producing fake photographs with dead people in it by 1840. However, according to the narrative, he was born in 1832, so he would have been just 8 years old when he was doing it. As bullshit. In 1860, another well-known photographer, J.W. Black, produced the first aerial photographs in America when he took a ride in a hot air balloon when the balloon navigator Samuel Archer King on board the Queen of the Air. This was just 2 years after the French photographer Nader conducted similar experiments also whilst traveling in a hot air balloon. Victorian photomontage allowed up to 30 glass plates or layers to be added to an image, and as well as this, they also painted over them. Sometimes they would just paint over a building or the skyline, and often painted people and horses onto them. In 1871, a famous French photographer named Ernest Eugene Epithet produced a series of fake images known as the Crimes de la Commune, designed specifically to discredit the communes or who were protesting against the royalist learning government, but put into power after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Okay, so you could tell they were doing the photoshopping back in the 1800s, y'all, just like they were doing the weather manipulation, because it's all Tartarian. It's all Tartarian technology. Okay, they're just repurposing. There's nothing new under the sun. They just reuse what was already here and the technology that we actually invented. Okay. The last part. These images, one of which I've included in this book, depict the communes as brutal and savage, with scenes of mass murder and the slaughter of dozens of people, which quite simply never happened. Thus, it seems, was the first example of photography being used as propaganda, and it continued well into World War I and World War II. And in fact, one of the most famous photos of Stalin is Photoshop, titled "The Commissaire Vanishes," and still available online for all to see. One moment, the Commissaire stood on Stalin's left, and the next, he is gone. All right. So why did they start doing this? Well, the first camera was produced or reverse engineered in 1816 by Joseph Nephilson Nesapete, and was called the heliograph. I don't think I said his name right, but work with me. This wasn't very long after the reset of 1776 and the end of the Napoleonic Wars, so quite a lot of Tartarian Moorish buildings still existed around the world. Photographs were taken specifically for the major cities where remnants of the old world remain, and these structures, as well as huge trees on the horizon, were either painted over or had the background from another photograph put in its place. They also painted people and horses into many of the photographs. They whitewashed a lot of the portraits too, especially of the royal families, because they were all melanated. Okay. Just telling you, the Anunnaki did a lot with these families. Okay. So then it says, they also painted people and horses into many of the photographs to make places where the adult population had been wiped out look heavily populated. Once aware of this, simply by zooming into many of these old world photos, you can see the edges of the buildings cut out, various things added, and often white scratch marks where electricity wires were present before the invention of electricity. Telling you, it didn't just stop at altering photographs. They did it at postcards and paintings too. Perhaps the most famous example of forged paintings is by the engraver A.H. Ritchie, which in 1852 he took a portrait of John C. Calhoun by Thomas Hicks, a virulent racist and slavery proponent who despised Lincoln and painted Abe's head into a body of Calhoun. Abraham Lincoln was melanated, you guys. I actually have his memoirs over here and a picture of what he actually looked like. Okay. It says Dexter Press Inc. was one of the largest publishers of the Cromer era postcards in America. For unconfirmed reasons, by the 1940s, frequently placed the same sky into photographs of cities in both North and South America. I've also included examples of these within the book, and he has. So that's it for me. We went through and we've read chapters 8 and 9. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys, that we're staying up to date on our reading. And the next one I come back, we're going to get into the asylums, and that's chapter 10. We're going to talk about the asylums, and then we're going to look at chapter 11. And I'm going to show you some more pictures, okay? Chapter 11 is going to cover, I'm just going to give you a heads up or an idea of what we're looking at, because we're almost done with the book. Chapter 11, we're going to cover the asylums. In chapter 10, we're going to chapter 10, we're going to talk about the asylums. Chapter 11, we're going to talk about the prisons, okay? And then we're going to give you some dates to support that, right? So then that's going to be chapter 10 and 11. That's the asylums and the prisons. And then chapter 12, we're going to get into the orphans and the orphan trains, okay? Because how they had to go ahead and repopulate the planet, because a lot of people don't know this information, and I find it highly I need some more things. I find it highly fascinating. I'm just enamored to be able to share this information with you guys. So anyway, I appreciate you guys, letting me read to you. It's at 46 minutes. So I'm going to jump off of here. I'm going to upload this video over to YouTube. And then sometime, hopefully this week, we'll come back and we'll talk about the asylums and the prisons. And then we're going to get into the orphan trains. And then I have another book over here that was from Mind Unveiled for YouTube channel. They put together postcards of the Cabbage Patch babies and how they repopulated this world, basically. They were clones. We had the capability of incubators and clones back then in the 1800s because it was Tartarian, okay? And this is how these children were groomed. There are a lot of people that walk around that do not have an inner dialogue. I mean, I know how that sounds. I mean, we're seeing AI take over, but when you look at the fact that we've had this technology since Thoth did the Emerald Tablets, and he talked about being in regeneration chambers and taking on or assuming a body at will, how they transferred their consciousness into bodies. This was been done thousands of years. If you look at how many resets that were here, and the people who built the pyramids and our ancestors who built the pyramids and the technology that they had at that time, and then the aircraft and the cities underground that nobody talks about within Hollow Earth, I'm simply telling you, this world is so much larger than you think. There are so many more people in this world that have been unalived, and there are so many things that are hidden that are not brought into plain sight that when you question them, it's considered to be pseudoscience. And this is where we've got to stop doing that. We really have to stop calling people who actually have an alternate view and who are critical thinkers. We got to stop labeling them as quote unquote pseudoscientists and conspiracy theorists. These are people who critical think like myself. And I'm just sharing this information again because I find it fascinating, and I think it's worth a conversation, right? Anyway, I hope you guys have an amazing night. Remember what I always say, be the change you want to see all around this earth dome, because it's up to you and I to make a positive change. Read from this book. I talked about this book and pointed you in this direction. And I also brought it home with this book at the beginning, just to recap what we read a couple of days ago over the weekend. So anyway, over the wars and the riots and the things like that, especially here in the Americas. I'll talk to you guys soon. You guys have a great night.